Hello. It was a Saturday evening, the kind where nothing big is planned, and the world seems to slow down for just a moment. I had just come back from a quick trip to the store. Milk, bread, a bottle of red wine. Things my wife, Natalie, had casually added to a list scribbled on the back of an old receipt. It was supposed to be one of those quiet nights when we'd sit together on the couch and watch whatever show we weren't really following. When I got home, the lights in the living room were dim, and the house had that stillness that only happens when someone's having a private moment. I walked in quietly, careful not to drop the grocery bags too loudly. Then, as I rounded the corner toward the kitchen, I heard it, a voice. Not just any voice. Her voice. Natalie was on the phone, her tone hushed, but unmistakably familiar. It wasn't the usual phone call, though, and I knew it the second I caught the way she laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh I heard when she was on the phone with her mom or her coworkers. It was softer, more personal. Too personal. My heart gave a warning thump. "Yeah, he just left," she whispered, her voice trailing off like she was sharing a secret. "I think we have time." Time? Time for what? I stayed where I was, frozen by the sound of her voice, but unable to stop listening. "No, he has no idea," she continued, chuckling. "He's been so distracted lately, always working, always tired. I don't think he even notices when I'm not around." The grocery bag slipped from my hand, landing with a soft thud on the kitchen floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like thunder in my ears. Her voice stopped. I heard the shuffle of feet, and the next thing I knew, she was standing in the doorway, phone still clutched in her hand, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. "Oh," she said, her voice trembling slightly as she quickly ended the call. "You're home early." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. My gaze darted to the phone in her hand, the silence between us stretching like a thin wire ready to snap. She knew I'd heard enough. But here's the thing about moments like these. They don't happen like they do in the movies. There was no dramatic confrontation, no immediate shouting. I just stood there, and in that eerie silence, I felt my mind spiraling, already piecing together fragments of things I should have noticed but didn't. Her late nights out with friends, her sudden interest in the gym after years of avoiding it, the way she'd been distant, even when we were sitting right next to each other. I had ignored the signs, chalked it all up to life being hectic. I blamed myself instantly, as if I had handed her a reason to betray me. "I forgot the wine," I finally said, my voice flat and detached. It was the only thing I could think to say as I picked up the fallen groceries and set them on the counter. Natalie opened her mouth as if to say something, but I walked past her without waiting to hear it. I wasn't ready for her excuses. I wasn't ready for any of it. All I knew was that whatever fragile world I had been living in had just cracked wide open, and I wasn't sure how to pick up the pieces. I went to the bathroom, locked the door behind me, and splashed cold water on my face, hoping the shock would jolt me out of whatever daze I was in. But when I looked at myself in the mirror, the truth was staring back at me, clear as day. My wife was cheating on me, and the worst part? It wasn't with a stranger. I knew exactly who it was. The voice on the other end of that phone call? It belonged to someone I had trusted for years, my best friend Mark. I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling while Natalie slept soundly beside me, her breathing slow and steady like she didn't have a care in the world. I kept thinking about the phone call, replaying every word, every laugh. My mind kept circling back to one thing, Mark. I had known him for over a decade. We met in college, survived wild nights, terrible jobs, and even worse relationships together. He was the guy I trusted with everything, my secrets, my dreams, and apparently my wife. By the time the sun rose, I had worked through every possible emotion. Anger, betrayal, denial. They all took turns tearing through me. But when morning came, I was calm. Too calm. Like the kind of calm you feel before a storm breaks. I made coffee, toasted some bread, and acted like nothing had happened. Natalie came down the stairs in her bathrobe, looking as put together as she always did, like she had mastered the art of hiding chaos beneath a picture-perfect exterior. "Morning," she said, her voice cheerful and completely fake. I watched her pour herself a cup of coffee, the same woman who less than 12 hours ago was giggling on the phone with my best friend. I wondered how many times she had done this. woken up next to me, knowing she had been with him the night before or was planning to meet him again soon. I blamed myself. It hit me like a punch to the gut. Had I worked too much? Missed too many date nights? Ignored her needs while I was busy building our future? Maybe this was on me for not noticing the cracks until they had turned into craters. She sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee like nothing had changed. I wanted to scream, to throw the mug against the wall and demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to know how deep this went, how long it had been happening, how many lies she had told, and whether Mark had ever looked me in the eye and laughed about how clueless I was. Natalie looked up from her phone and smiled. "What's on the agenda today?" she asked. "Just work," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "I might meet up with Mark later, though." She flinched. Barely. But I saw it. Her hand trembled slightly before she set the coffee cup back on the table. "Oh," she said, trying to sound casual. "What for?" I shrugged. "Haven't seen him in a while. Thought it'd be good to catch up." Her gaze shifted quickly, and she got up from the table, mumbling something about taking a shower. I sat there, gripping my coffee mug, and felt the first wave of satisfaction wash over me. I had shaken her. As soon as she was out of earshot, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old messages. There it was, weeks of seemingly innocent conversations between me and Mark. I had texted him last week about grabbing a beer, and he had replied with a simple, "Busy tonight, maybe next week." Busy with my wife, apparently. I opened the photos folder and found one from just a few weeks ago, a picture of the three of us at a barbecue, smiling like the perfect trio. I stared at Mark's face, at the way his arm casually rested around my shoulders. Was he laughing at me even then? The rage simmered just beneath the surface, but I held it down. I couldn't let it out yet. Instead, I closed the photo and set my phone aside. The pieces were starting to come together, but I wasn't finished gathering them. I needed more. By the time Natalie came back downstairs, I had made up my mind. I would see Mark today. I'd smile, joke, and act like I didn't know a damn thing. But inside, I'd be watching every word he said, looking for the cracks in his lies. She kissed me on the cheek before heading out to run errands, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she knew just how thin the ice beneath her feet had become. Probably not. That was the thing about people like her, they never thought they'd get caught. As soon as she was gone, I grabbed my car keys and headed out. My first stop wasn't Mark's place, though. It was the little diner down the street where I could sit in a booth, sip bad coffee, and figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I wasn't sure what I was angrier about, the betrayal or the fact that I had trusted them both so completely. But one thing was certain. When I faced Mark, I wasn't going to let him see me coming. The diner smelled like burnt bacon and stale coffee, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. I sat in a booth near the window, stirring sugar into my cup, though I wasn't planning to drink it. My mind was too busy dissecting every interaction I'd ever had with Mark and Natalie. The signs were all there, hidden in plain sight, like a puzzle I hadn't bothered to solve until now. The inside jokes they shared, the way Mark always seemed to know what Natalie liked without asking. I had brushed it off as harmless friendship, assuming that our years of trust were enough to protect me. I was an idiot for thinking that. My phone vibrated on the table, and when I checked it, there was a message from Mark. "Hey man, you free to grab that beer today? Let me know." I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around the phone. The audacity of him to casually suggest a hangout, knowing full well what he'd been doing behind my back, made my blood boil. But I couldn't let him know I was onto him. Not yet. I texted back. "Yeah, sounds good. How about 2 p.m. at the usual spot?" The usual spot was a sports bar we'd been going to for years, the kind of place with sticky floors and walls covered in jerseys. It felt fitting to meet him there, where our friendship had always seemed unshakable. His reply came almost immediately. "See you there." I set my phone down and leaned back in the booth, exhaling slowly. I had no idea what I was going to say to him. Should I play dumb and let him dig his own grave, or should I go straight for the throat and confront him head-on? The second option was tempting, but something told me Mark would deny everything, just like Natalie would. People like them always did. By the time I got to the bar, I had a plan, one that wasn't fully formed, but enough to get me through the conversation without snapping. I walked in and spotted him sitting at a booth near the back, nursing a beer and scrolling through his phone like he didn't have a care in the world. "Hey," he said, grinning as I slid into the seat across from him. "Hey," I replied, forcing a smile. "Been a while." "Yeah, man. Work's been crazy," he said, shaking his head. "You know how it is?" I nodded, pretending to listen as he launched into some story about a project at work. My eyes studied him, searching for any sign of guilt. But Mark was good. Too good. He laughed at the right moments, cracked a joke about an old memory, and even asked about Natalie. "How's Nat doing?" he asked, taking a sip of his beer. I clenched my jaw, but kept my expression neutral. "She's good. Busy, but good." He nodded, leaning back against the booth. "That's great. You guys have always been solid, you know?" The irony of that statement nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "Yeah, we have. But things have been a little off lately." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Off how?" I shrugged, trying to appear casual. I don't know. She's been distant. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But I've been wondering if something's going on." He hesitated for a split second, just long enough for me to notice. "Nah, man," he said, shaking his head. "Nat loves you. You're just stressed with work. Trust me, I know how that goes." I leaned back, watching him closely. He didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. If I hadn't overheard that phone call, I probably would have believed him. The waitress came by to take our orders, and as she left, I decided to test him. "You ever notice anything weird with her?" I asked. "I mean, you've known her almost as long as I have. If anyone would notice, it'd be you." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, man. Nat's solid. You don't have anything to worry about." I wanted to reach across the table and wipe that smug grin off his face. Instead, I smiled and nodded, pretending his words had reassured me. "Yeah, you're probably right. I just needed to hear it from someone I trust." He smiled again, and for a moment, I wondered if he realized just how much I knew. If he did, he didn't show it. As we finished our beers, I thought about the next step. Confronting Natalie directly wasn't enough. I needed to corner her in a way she couldn't escape. She'd deny everything, of course, but I'd make sure her lies unraveled piece by piece. Mark slapped me on the back as we left the bar. "Let's do this again soon," he said, his tone light and carefree. "Definitely," I replied, already plotting how I'd bring him down along with her. I watched him walk away, his confidence practically radiating off him. But what he didn't know was that the clock was ticking. I had given him enough rope, and soon, he'd hang himself with it. When I got home, the house was quiet, too quiet. Natalie's car was in the driveway, but I didn't see her in the living room or kitchen. For a moment, I wondered if she had left again, sneaking off to meet Mark after our little beer session. But then I heard the faint hum of music coming from upstairs. I walked up slowly, each step deliberate, as if I needed to prepare myself for whatever I might find. But when I reached the bedroom, the door was open, and there she was, sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, you're back already?" I nodded, setting my keys on the dresser. "Yeah, just had a couple beers with Mark." Her smile didn't falter, but I saw the slight tension in her shoulders, the way she shifted just a little too quickly to set her phone aside. I could tell she was wondering what we had talked about, whether Mark had slipped up and said something he shouldn't have. "How was it?" she asked, her voice casual but forced. "Good," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "We caught up on work stuff, talked about old times." I paused, watching her carefully. I asked him if he's noticed anything off with you lately. Her eyes widened slightly, and she quickly masked it with a laugh. "What do you mean by off?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Just that you've been distant." I figured maybe Mark would have noticed something too. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, a habit she always had when she was nervous. "Mark doesn't know anything about that," she said, her tone defensive. "I've just been busy, that's all. Work errands, you know how it is." I leaned back against the headboard, crossing my arms. "I do. But it's not just that, is it?" She stood up abruptly, walking over to the closet and pretending to sort through the laundry. "I don't know what you're trying to say, but if you think I'm hiding something, you're wrong." There it was, the first denial, delivered with just enough indignation to make it seem believable. But I wasn't buying it. "I overheard you on the phone last night," I said, my voice calm but firm. You were talking to someone. You didn't know I was home? She froze for a second, her hand gripping a hanger. Then, slowly, she turned around, her face carefully composed. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't do that, I said, standing up. Don't act like I'm imagining things. I heard you say I didn't notice when you weren't around. I heard you laugh like you were sharing some inside joke. So don't stand there and lie to me. Her lips parted as if she was about to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the bed. Her shoulders slumped like the weight of what I'd just said had finally hit her. Are you seeing someone else? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. No, she whispered, shaking her head. I would never. Don't lie. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she might crack, that she'd finally confess and admit everything. But then she lifted her head, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of defiance and desperation. You're wrong, she said, her voice stronger now. I'm not cheating on you. I don't know what you think you heard. But it wasn't that. She was good, I'd give her that. If I hadn't overheard the conversation or seen the signs, I might have believed her. But I wasn't that clueless anymore. Then let me see your phone, I said, extending my hand. Her face paled, and she quickly stood up. Why? You don't trust me now? Just give me the phone, Natalie. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the dresser, where her phone was charging. Then, with a forced laugh, she shook her head. I'm not doing this, okay? I'm not going to be treated like a criminal in my own home. I could feel my patience wearing thin, the rage bubbling just beneath the surface. But I held it back, forcing myself to stay calm. She wanted me to explode, to say something cruel so she could shift the blame onto me. I'll find out eventually, I said, my voice cold. You know that, right? She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her phone and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I heard her footsteps heading down the stairs, followed by the sound of the front door opening and closing. I sat back down on the bed, running a hand through my hair. She was slipping, and she knew it. The cracks in her lies were getting bigger, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but one thing was certain. I wasn't letting this go. Not until I had the full truth, and when I did, there would be no denying it. I didn't chase her when she left. I didn't call or text to ask where she'd gone or when she'd be back. The truth was I needed her gone. Her presence was suffocating, making it hard to think clearly, and I had work to do. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the dining table, fingers tapping against the keys as I pulled up everything I could. Our shared phone plan was the first place I checked: call logs, messages, and data usage. It didn't take long to notice the pattern. Late-night calls to a familiar number. Not every night, but enough to be obvious once I connected the dots. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, but I didn't need it to be. I recognized it immediately. Mark's. I clenched my jaw, the evidence confirming what I had already known deep down. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was doing it recklessly, as if she believed she'd never be caught. After the call logs, I checked her social media. Most of her recent posts were generic. Photos of our dog, sunsets, and coffee cups captioned with things like Sunday vibes or another long day. But as I scrolled further back, I found something interesting. A picture from 2 months ago, taken at a bar where she and her friends had supposedly gone for a girls' night. Mark was in the background, barely visible, but there. It wasn't just coincidence. He had been there on purpose, hiding in plain sight, knowing I wouldn't notice. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I felt betrayed on a level I couldn't put into words. I had given her everything: trust, loyalty, and the benefit of the doubt. And she had taken it all and thrown it away for my best friend. But there was still one more thing I needed to check. I opened the messaging app linked to our shared cloud account, praying that her recent messages hadn't been deleted. And that's when I found it. A conversation she had archived, hidden from plain view, but not deleted. The messages were short, coded, but they told me enough. Did you tell him where you were last night? Just said I was at the store. He didn't ask questions. Good. Let's keep it that way. He's been acting weird lately. I think he's suspicious. Relax. We've been careful. He has no proof. I read the messages over and over, each line fueling the fire in my chest. They weren't just having an affair. They were mocking me, treating me like a fool who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I took screenshots of the messages and saved them in a private folder on my laptop. As much as I wanted to confront her with the evidence right then and there, I knew I had to be smart about this. Natalie was slippery, a master at denial, and she tried to twist this into something it wasn't. But with this in hand, she wouldn't be able to escape. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly, my mind already spinning with possibilities. I could wait until she got back and confront her right away, or I could hold off and gather more. The second option was tempting. I wanted her to squirm, to feel the pressure building until she couldn't take it anymore. But before I could make a decision, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Natalie, staying out for a bit. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. The old me, the one who trusted her, would have believed she was at a friend's house or out shopping. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. I knew exactly where she was. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, the cold evening air hitting me like a slap to the face. My gut told me I was going to find her at Mark's place, and for once, I hoped my instincts were wrong. But deep down, I knew they weren't. As I drove, my mind raced with thoughts of what I'd say when I saw her. Would I burst in, demanding answers, or would I play it cool, catching them off guard before delivering the final blow? I didn't know, but I was ready for either. When I pulled up outside Mark's apartment, I parked a block away, keeping my car out of sight. His place was on the second floor of a small building, and the lights in his living room were on. I watched from a distance, my pulse pounding as I waited for any sign of her. Minutes passed, and then the door opened. My breath hitched as I saw Natalie step outside, her hair slightly disheveled, the same coat she had been wearing earlier still draped over her shoulders. She wasn't alone. Mark stood in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame like he didn't have a care in the world. They exchanged a few words before she walked to her car, and he stayed there, watching her leave. I stayed hidden, waiting until she drove off before stepping out of my car and making my way toward his apartment. I didn't knock. I didn't give him the chance to prepare. I turned the handle, and to my surprise, the door wasn't locked. When I stepped inside, Mark was still standing near the doorway, scrolling through his phone, completely unaware of my presence. When he looked up and saw me, the color drained from his face. "Hey, man," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you here." I closed the door behind me and locked it. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside me. "I figured it was time we had a little talk." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his fake grin fading as he realized this wasn't a friendly visit. He set his phone down on the counter, trying to mask his unease. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the slight tremor beneath it. I didn't answer right away. I took my time, scanning the apartment. It was as familiar as I remembered. Same old furniture, same messy coffee table covered in empty beer bottles and snack wrappers. But now it all felt different, tainted. The place where he had betrayed me wasn't just some apartment anymore. It was a crime scene. I finally turned to face him. "How long?" Mark blinked, pretending not to understand. "How long what?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice sharp. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His eyes darted toward the door, as if he was calculating whether he could make a run for it. I stepped forward, blocking his path. "Don't even think about it." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. Then, he exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, man, it's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, it's exactly what I think. I heard her on the phone last night. I saw the call logs, the messages. So don't stand there and insult my intelligence by pretending this didn't happen." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "It was a mistake," he muttered. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "But it did," I said, my voice cold. "And you didn't stop it, did you? You kept meeting her, lying to my face, acting like my friend while you were screwing my wife." He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Sorry," I repeated, my fists clenching in my sides. "You're sorry now that you're caught." "How long, Mark?" Give me a number. He hesitated before answering. A few months. A few months. I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had spent those months thinking everything was fine, working late, planning weekend getaways with Natalie, all while they were laughing behind my back. You could have stopped, I said, my voice shaking slightly, not from weakness but from the effort it took to hold back my rage. You could have told me the truth. But you didn't. Why? He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. I don't know, he admitted. It just happened. We didn't mean for it to go this far. I took a step closer, and he flinched. You didn't mean for it to go this far, but you made damn sure it did. Every time you answered her calls, every time you met her, you made a choice. Don't act like this was some accident. He didn't respond, and that silence was all I needed to confirm how deep the betrayal ran. I backed away, pacing the room as I tried to decide my next move. My mind was racing with possibilities. Punching him, exposing him and Natalie to everyone we knew, or walking out and never speaking to either of them again. But none of it felt satisfying. You know what the worst part is? I said, stopping in front of him. I trusted you. I would have taken a bullet for you. And you threw it all away for what? For a few months of sneaking around? He lowered his head again, and I saw his shoulders shake slightly. I wasn't sure if he was crying or just trying to hold himself together, but I didn't care. His regret meant nothing to me now. Does she know I'm here? I asked. He shook his head. No. She left before you showed up. Good. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the screenshots of their messages. Because I'm going to show her these. Let's see how well she can deny it when I have proof. Mark's eyes widened. Please, he said, his voice desperate. Don't do that. She'll lose everything. You don't have to ruin her life. I laughed again, a cold, humorless sound. She already ruined her life. I'm just making sure she can't sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happened. He reached for my arm, but I pulled away before he could touch me. Don't, I warned. You've done enough. I turned and walked toward the door, my mind set on what needed to happen next. But before I left, I paused and looked back at him one last time. By the way, I said, my voice calm but deadly, this was never just about her. You were my friend, my best friend, and now you're nothing. I didn't wait for his response. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. The cold night air hit my face, but this time it didn't ground me. I was too far gone, too consumed by the need to finish what I had started. I pulled out my phone and called Natalie. She didn't answer. I wasn't surprised. She was probably avoiding me, knowing that something had shifted between us. But she couldn't run forever. I had proof, and when I confronted her, there would be no room for lies. No more denying, no more pretending. She had made her bed, and now she was going to lie in it. I got into my car and drove home, each mile bringing me closer to the moment of truth. And this time, there would be no escape for her. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the adrenaline had started to wear off, leaving me with a cold, steady anger. There was no confusion anymore, no second-guessing myself. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't holding back. The house was dark except for the glow of the living room lamp. I stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. I could hear the faint sound of the TV from the living room. Natalie was curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up when I entered, her expression shifting from relaxed to cautious in an instant. You're back, she said softly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Yeah, I replied, setting my keys on the table. We need to talk? Her fingers twitched nervously, but she nodded. Okay, what about? I walked over to the coffee table, placing my phone down so she could see the screen. The screenshots of her texts with Mark stared back at her, each message like a dagger waiting to strike. Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic setting in. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You tell me, I said, crossing my arms. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been lying to me for months. Sneaking around with Mark, laughing at me behind my back. She shook her head rapidly, as if denying it could make the evidence disappear. It's not what you think, she stammered. I can explain. Don't. I cut her off, my voice cold and firm. I've heard enough excuses. I want the truth. All of it. She stared at the phone, her breathing uneven. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess, to finally come clean. But instead, she did exactly what I expected. She denied it. "Those messages don't mean anything," she said, her voice trembling. "They're just texts. Mark and I were joking around. It wasn't serious." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Joking around? You call late-night calls and secret meetups a joke? Do you think I'm that stupid, Natalie?" "No," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You just what?" I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You just needed a little excitement? You just couldn't resist betraying the one person who trusted you more than anything." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. "I'm sorry," she said between gasps. "It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Yeah, that's what Mark said too," I replied, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Funny how neither of you meant for it, but somehow kept doing it for months." She lowered her hands, her tear-streaked face looking up at me with desperation. "Please just listen to me. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this." "Fix it?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "There's no fixing this, Natalie. You destroyed everything the moment you decided to crawl into bed with him." She stood up, reaching for my arm, but I stepped back, putting distance between us. "Please," she begged, "don't throw us away." "You already did," I said. "I'm just finishing what you started." The silence that followed was suffocating. Her tears continued to fall, but they didn't affect me. Not this time. I had given her everything: love, trust, loyalty. And she had thrown it all away without a second thought. I walked toward the door, grabbing my jacket. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice cracking. "To clear my head," I said. "Don't bother waiting up. Please don't leave like this," she sobbed. "We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and looked back at her one last time. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I thought I knew, now felt like a stranger. "You should have thought of that before," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a breath of freedom. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the past few months lifting off my shoulders. She could cry, beg, and make promises all she wanted, but I knew the truth. This wasn't something I could forgive. As I drove away, my phone buzzed with messages from her, but I ignored them. I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I didn't know where I was headed, but it didn't matter. Anywhere was better than where I had just come from. The man who had walked into that house hours ago was gone, replaced by someone who had learned the hard way that trust is fragile and betrayal cuts deeper than any wound. And as I left that chapter of my life behind, I knew one thing for sure. Natalie and Mark would have to live with the mess they'd created. Me? I was moving forward, with or without them. Bye.